From the story, a human fed two hungry alien girls. What they did next stunned him. Jackson Hale lived alone on planet Velmera, far from Earth, far from any human colony, and even farther from any place one might call home. He was an engineer assigned to repair old alien signal towers that no one really cared about anymore. Most of the galaxy had moved on from these ruins, but Jackson liked the silence, the wind, and the strange beauty of this forgotten world. His shelter was simple: metal walls, solar panels, a few tools, and a stove he used to cook whatever supplies arrived each month. That evening, as the twin moons rose slowly over the horizon, he was heating his dinner, a thick vegetable stew with some preserved bread. The scent filled the room, and just as he reached for a spoon, he heard something. Soft footsteps, cautious, almost unsure, just outside his door. He paused, confused. Velmera had no wild animals in this region, and no visitors were expected for weeks. He stood up quietly and opened the door, and what he saw made him forget his dinner completely. Two small figures stood in the dim light, wrapped in dusty robes and shivering slightly from the cold desert air. Their skin glowed faintly, a smooth pearlescent color that shimmered under the moonlight. Their eyes were large, luminous, and filled with something deeper than fear, hunger, exhaustion, and a silent plea for help. Jackson stepped back in surprise, not because he felt threatened, but because he had never seen aliens so young, so fragile, and so human in emotion. The taller of the two held the other's hand tightly, protectively, and looked at Jackson with a mix of hope and caution. They said something in a soft language he didn't understand, but the message was clear. They were hungry, tired, lost. Without saying a word, Jackson motioned them inside. They hesitated for a moment, exchanged a quick glance, then stepped forward. Inside, the warmth of the shelter seemed to comfort them, though they still stood near the door as if unsure whether they were truly safe. Jackson moved slowly, showing them the stew, breaking the bread into smaller pieces and offering it gently. They sat down on the floor, legs crossed, and began to eat, not like wild animals, but carefully, as if every bite was precious. Jackson watched in silence, his own dinner forgotten, and for the first time in years, he felt like he wasn't alone. As they finished eating, something strange happened. The taller girl reached into her robe and pulled out a small glowing pendant, an oval stone that pulsed with soft green light. She held it up and whispered words in her own language. The other girl joined her, both speaking softly, and the moment they did, the far wall of Jackson's shelter lit up with glowing lines. Ancient symbols appeared, slowly spreading across the surface like veins of light. Symbols Jackson had seen before, but only in damaged ruins and broken towers. He stared in disbelief. His shelter, built over an old communication node, was reacting to their presence. The girls stood up, walked toward the glowing wall, and pressed their hands on it. The symbols shifted, reorganized themselves, and then pulsed once before fading to a soft glow. The taller girl looked back at Jackson, then pointed to the pendant, then to him, then to the ground beneath their feet. Jackson didn't understand the words, but he felt it in his bones. Something ancient was waking up, and these two visitors had triggered it. Somehow, feeding them had activated something buried deep under the ground. This wasn't just an old shelter anymore. It was the top of something much older and far more mysterious. Jackson took a deep breath and approached the wall. He placed his hand where theirs had been, but nothing happened. The girl touched his hand gently and pressed it down again, while holding the pendant close. This time, the symbols reacted. They glowed a different color, and then a low vibration hummed through the floor. It was as if the earth itself was responding to their combined presence. Jackson's mind raced. Could this be an ancient vault? A hidden base? Why would a meal, a simple act of kindness, unlock something this powerful? The girls smiled softly, not with mischief, but with quiet understanding. They knew something he didn't. They weren't just refugees or lost children. They were connected to the past in ways he couldn't yet explain. That night, after the girls had fallen asleep wrapped in blankets on the floor, Jackson sat alone near the wall, staring at the faded symbols. He thought about the stories he had read, of ancient civilizations that once ruled the stars and then vanished. Some believed they destroyed themselves. Others believed they simply went into hiding. But no one ever expected that the key to awakening their secrets might come in the form of two silent, starving girls with a glowing pendant and a need for one warm meal. The desert outside was quiet, but the wind carried a strange rhythm now, as if the planet itself had started to breathe again. Jackson felt something shift, not just under his shelter, but inside his own heart. Tomorrow, he would ask more questions. He would scan the ground beneath. He would try to translate the symbols. But tonight, he sat quietly, feeling the warmth of the fire, the gentle breath of the girls sleeping nearby, and the echo of something ancient beginning to stir beneath his feet. From the story, a human fed two hungry alien girls. What they did next stunned him. The next morning on Velmera began with a strange silence. Not the usual quiet that Jackson had grown used to, but a deep, thoughtful stillness that seemed to press against the walls of his shelter like a whisper from the past. The two alien girls, Luma and Saya, names he had gently given them, were already awake when he opened his eyes. They sat cross-legged near the glowing wall, carefully drawing symbols in the dust with their fingers. Jackson watched them for a moment, trying to make sense of what they were doing. Their faces were calm, focused, as if they were remembering something, not learning it. The marks they drew were the same as the ones now faintly glowing on the wall, and even though Jackson had seen many alien languages in his career, this one was different. It didn't look like it was made to be read. It looked like it was meant to be felt. Every curve and line seemed to carry emotion, like a story trapped inside a shape. Curious, Jackson picked up his portable scanner and hovered it over the wall. The readings surprised him. Beneath the surface, hidden under layers of rock and old metal, was an energy source unlike anything in the current galactic database. It pulsed slowly like a sleeping heartbeat and responded slightly to the presence of the girls and their glowing pendant. Jackson's mind raced. Could this place be more than just an old communication tower? What if it was built on something ancient, something buried long before humans even reached the stars? The pendant clearly acted as a key, but it wasn't made by the girls. It was passed down to them, which meant someone knew this day would come. Someone had waited. Luma noticed his scanning device and gently touched it, then pointed to the symbol she had drawn. She said something softly, tapping her chest, then Jackson's, then the wall. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the message. Connection. Somehow, the language wasn't just for reading. It was a bridge between people, between species, between times. Saya joined her, opening a small pouch she had hidden inside her robe. Inside it was a piece of cloth, old and faded, covered in the same symbols, but drawn by hand with a deep red ink. Jackson looked closely and realized that the symbols formed a map, a path that started where they were standing and led to something far below the ground. Feeling a sudden urgency, Jackson pulled up the floor panels of the shelter and began checking the old foundations. He found what he was looking for near the back wall, a thin layer of unnatural stone, smooth and warm to the touch, covered in more symbols. It wasn't just a ruin, it was a sealed entrance. The shelter had been unknowingly built on top of something sacred, something powerful. As he studied the markings, he noticed they weren't just repeating the same symbols from above. They were telling a story of a great civilization that once spread across galaxies, not with war, but with knowledge. They had stored their wisdom in hidden places like this one, only to be revealed when someone worthy came along. Not strong, not rich, just kind. Jackson stood up slowly, the weight of the discovery pressing against his chest like gravity. He had come here thinking he would be fixing broken towers and old tech, but instead, He had found a secret waiting to be shared. And the key to that secret had been 2 hungry girls and a simple meal. He looked at them now, Luma with her quiet strength, Saya with her curious eyes, and realized they weren't lost. They were guided. They had followed the signs their ancestors left, signs that led them not to a warrior or a king, but to him, a human with warm food and an open heart. He powered up his translator and began comparing the symbols with every language database he had access to, but nothing matched. That's when he remembered a rumor from his academy days about a root script, a mythical language from which all others had evolved. Most scholars dismissed it as legend, but Jackson now believed he was looking at it. The way the symbols changed shape depending on who touched them, the way they responded not just to voice but to emotion, it was beyond writing. It was living memory, encoded into symbols that only revealed themselves to those who came with pure intent. The pendant began to glow brighter as the day wore on, and Luma placed it once more into the center of the sealed stone. This time, the stone flickered with light, and the symbols shifted rapidly, rearranging themselves into a perfect circle. The ground trembled slightly, and a low hum filled the room, but the door did not yet open. Jackson understood it wasn't enough to find the entrance. The system wanted something more. A promise, perhaps, or proof. The pendant pulsed in time with the heartbeat Jackson felt through the floor, and for a moment, it felt like the planet itself was listening. He turned to the girls and placed his hand on the stone again, not scanning it, not testing it, just touching it with a quiet mind. He thought about the girls' hunger, their hope, the long journey they must have taken. He thought about how easy it would have been to ignore them, to turn them away. But he hadn't. Not because of duty, but because it felt right. Suddenly, the symbols lit up again, not with data, but with warmth. A message flowed into his mind like a dream. The one who gives without asking opens the way. Jackson stepped back, stunned. The language wasn't meant to be read by force. It responded to intent. Compassion had activated it. And now, part of the hidden language had been revealed to him, not just through symbols, but through feeling. He looked back at the wall and saw new symbols appear, glowing gold now, slowly forming into the next message. He didn't know what they meant yet, but he knew one thing: they were only just beginning. That night, as the stars filled the sky and the desert wind whispered across the hills, Jackson sat beside Luma and Saya, the ancient map in his hands and the promise of something greater beneath his feet. The language of the ancients was no longer silent. It had spoken, not in words, but in action. And the one who had fed 2 hungry strangers was now chosen, not by power, but by kindness, to uncover the wisdom of a forgotten world. From the story, a human fed 2 hungry alien girls. What they did next stunned him. As the quiet hum beneath the shelter grew louder, Jackson felt a strange pressure in the air, like something old had started to wake up after sleeping for ages. The glowing symbols on the sealed stone began to shift, not just in shape but in meaning. They weren't random anymore. They were becoming something more. Patterns started to connect like pieces of a puzzle, forming the outline of a message that only the right mind could read. Luma and Saya stood beside him, eyes wide with wonder, their small hands holding tightly to the glowing pendant, which now pulsed like a living heart. Jackson stared at the ancient wall and took a deep breath, not knowing what would happen next. But deep down, he felt that this moment had been waiting for him long before he ever arrived on Velmera. The ground beneath them gently trembled, and a thin line of light appeared down the center of the stone. Slowly, without any sound, the sealed door began to split apart, revealing a narrow staircase that disappeared into the darkness below. A soft blue glow lit the first few steps, and a sudden gust of warm air rose from the passage, carrying with it a scent of something old, dusty, but not dead. It smelled like time itself. Jackson hesitated only a moment before stepping forward. Luma and Saya followed without fear, as if they had known this path their whole lives. Together, they began to descend into the unknown. The stairs led them to a vast underground chamber, where the walls were covered with glowing symbols, thousands of them, arranged like stars in the sky. In the center of the room stood a tall, crystal pillar, completely transparent but filled with swirling lights, as if holding a storm inside. As soon as they stepped inside, the door above closed silently, sealing them in. But Jackson wasn't afraid. He felt something in his chest, a calm voice whispering without words, that this was meant to happen. The girls walked to the pillar and placed the pendant into a small slot at its base. Instantly, the room came alive. The symbols began to glow in waves, and the pillar lit up with images and voices, strange at first, but then slowly transforming into something Jackson could understand. The voice that spoke was deep and wise, like it had lived 1,000 lifetimes. It didn't come from speakers, but from everywhere at once, vibrating gently through their bones and minds. It said, "This is the final memory of the ancients. If you are hearing this, then the world has chosen you." Jackson stood frozen as the lights formed shapes in the air, images of alien cities made of light, of peaceful beings sharing knowledge across stars, of a galaxy that once thrived not with power, but with harmony. The message continued, telling of a time when a great danger spread through the stars, a hunger for war, control, and greed. The ancients did not fight it with weapons. They hid their knowledge, leaving clues only for those who could still show compassion and understanding. Jackson listened closely as the story unfolded. The ancients had created languages that could only be unlocked by emotions. Kindness, empathy, selflessness. They believed that only someone who could feel deeply and act with care could be trusted with their secrets. The message spoke of keys hidden in bloodlines, in memories, and in simple acts of humanity. Luma and Saya, though they came from a small, unknown world, carried the last spark of that ancient blood. And it was Jackson's kindness that awakened the final part of the message. Together, they had passed a test that no machine or warrior could pass. Jackson's heart pounded as the pillar shifted again, showing a star map, a path leading far beyond Velmera, toward a part of space completely unmarked in human records. The voice said this was the beginning of something new, a road that could restore what had been lost long ago. Then the light dimmed, and the chamber grew quiet once more. The message had ended, but the story was far from over. Jackson turned to the girls, who now looked at him not with fear or confusion, but with trust. He realized they were not just travelers or survivors. They were messengers, and now so was he. The pillar ejected the pendant gently, and with it, a small cube of light that floated into Jackson's hands. As he touched it, he felt thoughts rush into his mind. Maps, language, blueprints, and something even deeper. Emotions, memories, stories from a civilization long gone. It was not just information. It was life, preserved and waiting to be shared. They climbed the stairs slowly, their minds still spinning with what they had seen. When they reached the top, the door opened without a sound, and the desert wind greeted them like an old friend. The sun was setting, painting the sky with colors that seemed brighter now, as if the world itself knew what had just happened. Jackson looked at the pendant, then at the cube, and finally at the two girls. They had started as strangers in need, and now they were bound by a truth no one else could see. A truth that could change everything. That night, Jackson didn't sleep. He sat beneath the stars, replaying the message in his mind over and over again. He knew this was bigger than just one planet or one discovery. The galaxy was full of people, but very few listened. Very few understood the power of giving without asking, of helping without expecting. The ancients had trusted that one day someone would. And now, their message had been heard. Jackson didn't know what the future would bring, but he knew one thing for sure. This was not the end of his mission. It was the beginning of something far more important than anything he had ever imagined. From the story, A human fed two hungry alien girls. What they did next stunned him. The day after the underground chamber's discovery, the desert around Velmera seemed unchanged. But Jackson knew the truth. What had happened inside that hidden room wasn't just another relic of a lost civilization. It was a message. The silence that had followed the message still hung heavy in the air, like the calm before a storm. Jackson sat outside the shelter, staring at the setting sun, the faint hum of the ancient technology still echoing in his mind. The world outside seemed still, untouched, but he could feel the weight of something buried deep beneath the soil. The map from the crystal pillar was clearer now. He knew the path they had to follow, and it led him not just to distant stars, but to a door that lay buried beneath the dirt. Luma and Saya had been quiet all morning, their eyes filled with unspoken thoughts. They sat across from Jackson, their fingers tracing the glowing pendant, which now pulsed softly in the evening air. Their presence was comforting, yet Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. The door in the chamber hadn't opened fully. It was merely a glimpse, a hint of what lay beyond. Jackson knew there was more. The symbols on the wall, the patterns in the crystal pillar, they had all pointed to one thing: the door beneath the dirt. After a quiet dinner, Jackson gathered his tools and stood up, looking at the girls. They didn't need words. Their trust in him was unspoken, and they followed without hesitation as he led them back to the spot he had discovered earlier, the site where the shelter's foundations had met something old, something hidden. Jackson's heart raced. He wasn't sure what he expected to find, but he knew this was the moment that would change everything. The map had led him here, and it felt like destiny. The ground beneath them was rough, dry, cracked. Jackson knelt down, using his tools to carefully dig away at the earth. It was slow work, but the deeper he dug, the more he felt a strange, warm vibration coming from below. It wasn't just the ground shifting. It was something more. Something alive. Saya crouched beside him, her eyes narrowed, watching as he removed the final layer of dirt. Beneath it, a smooth stone door began to take shape, its edges faintly glowing with the same symbols Jackson had seen before. He could feel the pulse of energy beneath it, and the air around him seemed to hum with anticipation. Jackson's hands trembled as he traced the symbols on the door. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. The door wasn't just made of stone. It was woven with energy, like the very fabric of the planet itself had been shaped into a key. The pendant glowed brighter as he touched it to the door, the symbols reacting as if they recognized the familiar power. The stone shifted, slowly at first, then faster, as though it was waking from a long sleep. The vibrations grew stronger, and the earth around them seemed to tremble in response. With a sudden jolt, the door cracked open, revealing a dark, narrow passage leading deep beneath the surface. A cold draft of air rushed out, carrying the scent of earth, metal, and something ancient. Jackson looked at the girls. Luma nodded, her eyes filled with determination. Saya, who had always been silent, now spoke, her voice a soft whisper. It's time. Jackson didn't need any more encouragement. They stepped through the door, the pendant lighting the way as they descended into the darkness below. The passage was narrow, with walls that seemed to pulse and hum as they moved. The deeper they went, the more the air seemed to thicken, as though they were moving into something forgotten by time itself. It wasn't just an old ruin. It was a sanctuary, a place that had been sealed off for a reason. Jackson could feel the weight of history pressing down on him with every step. As they reached the end of the tunnel, they came to a large chamber. This room was unlike the one they had discovered before. It was vast, its walls covered in strange symbols and patterns that glowed faintly in the dark. The ceiling was high, disappearing into shadow, and the floor was smooth, made of a strange material that shimmered like glass. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, and upon it rested an object that immediately drew Jackson's attention. It was a cube, but not like any cube he had ever seen. It was made of a dark, iridescent material, and it seemed to pulse with energy. It was the source of the hum, the vibration that had been guiding him all along. Luma stepped forward, her hand outstretched. Jackson instinctively reached out to stop her, but she shook her head. There was no fear in her eyes, only certainty. She had known this moment was coming. With a steady hand, she placed the pendant onto the cube, and the room around them seemed to come alive. The symbols on the walls shifted, spinning like stars in a galaxy, and the cube began to glow. The energy in the room intensified, and Jackson felt a rush of emotions flood his mind. Images, sounds, and feelings that weren't his own. He saw the ancients, their civilization in its prime, spreading across the stars, not with weapons, but with knowledge. He felt their wisdom, their compassion, their hope. And then, just as quickly, the vision faded, leaving behind a single message, clear and unshakable. The time has come. Prepare for what is to come. The glow of the cube dimmed, but the chamber remained charged with energy. Jackson could feel it in his bones, a truth that was undeniable. This was just the beginning. The message had been passed down for eons, hidden in the dirt, in the stone, in the stars. The door beneath the dirt had opened, and now the path was clear. The galaxy was waiting, and it was up to him, and to the girls, to unlock the rest of the secret. Luma looked at Jackson, her eyes filled with a quiet resolve. "We have to go," she said simply. Jackson nodded, his mind racing. There was no going back. They had uncovered the door, and now they had to follow where it led. He had no idea what dangers or mysteries lay ahead, but one thing was certain. They were no longer just travelers in a forgotten corner of space. They were the bearers of an ancient message, and it was time to share it with the universe. The door beneath the dirt had opened, and so had a new chapter of history. Jackson felt the weight of the galaxy pressing against his shoulders as he stared out into the endless stars. The vastness was overwhelming, yet it had never felt so close. The pendant he had found on Velmera rested in his hand, its glow fading but still pulsing with a rhythm that seemed to speak to him. Beside him, Luma and Saya were silent, their faces serious. They had all come a long way, through secrets hidden deep within the planet's crust, past ancient messages and warnings left by the ancients. Now, the map had led them here, to the edge of everything they knew. The ship floated above the barren world that Jackson had come to think of as home. This place, Velmera, had given them everything. The keys to the past, the answers to questions no one had asked, and a way forward. It was no longer just a planet. It was the starting point of something much larger, something that could change the very fabric of the galaxy. The message had been clear. The time had come for them to share what they had learned. The question was, who would listen? "Do you think anyone will believe us?" Jackson asked, breaking the silence. His voice seemed small in the vastness of space, but it was a question that had been haunting him ever since they left the depths of Velmera's underground chamber. Luma turned to him, her eyes filled with quiet certainty. "They will have to," she said softly. "The galaxy needs to hear the truth. The ancients left their gift for a reason." Jackson nodded, still uncertain. They had learned about the ancients' civilization, their rise, their fall, and their wisdom. The ancients had once spread knowledge across the stars, not through force, but by sharing their understanding of the universe. It was a philosophy built on peace, on collaboration, on a shared sense of purpose. But that knowledge had been buried, hidden away to protect it from those who would use it for the wrong reasons. The message that had been left behind was a warning and a gift. The star map, now embedded in the ship's control system, had pointed to a distant location beyond the edge of known space. Jackson could feel the pull of it, an invisible thread that guided him forward. The path ahead was uncertain, but he knew they had to follow it. They had to unlock the final piece of the puzzle, the key that would unlock the galaxy's true potential. Luma and Saya stood by, their expressions unreadable. Jackson could sense their trust in him, but he also knew that the weight of this mission was not his alone. They were all part of something much greater than themselves now. a mission to share the gift of the ancients, to show the galaxy that peace, wisdom, and cooperation were the keys to surviving the dark times ahead. As the ship entered the warp drive, the stars blurred into streaks of light. The journey ahead would take them far from home, into uncharted territories where the unknown was just as dangerous as it was beautiful. Jackson looked out of the window, his thoughts racing. He couldn't help but wonder about the others, the ones who had never believed in the message of the ancients. Would they accept it, or would they try to destroy it? He didn't know, but one thing was certain. The gift of knowledge was powerful. It could change everything. The ship emerged from warp speed into a part of space that was unlike anything Jackson had ever seen. The stars here were dimmer, scattered far apart, and the space between them was vast and empty. It was as if they had entered a forgotten part of the galaxy, where time itself had stopped moving. In the distance, Jackson saw a faint glimmer. It was a planet, one that wasn't on any map, not even the one they had followed. "We're here," Luma said, her voice filled with awe. She had been studying the star map as much as Jackson, and she knew as well as he did that this was the place. This was where the final piece of the puzzle was hidden. But the closer they got to the planet, the more uneasy Jackson became. There was something about this place that felt wrong. It was too quiet, too still. The planet was covered in dense forests, vast oceans, and towering mountains that rose like jagged spikes from the surface. The skies above were dark, swirling with clouds that seemed to churn endlessly. Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. It was as though the planet was watching them, waiting. "We need to be careful," Jackson said, his voice steady but filled with a sense of urgency. "There's something here, something more than we can see." Saya, ever the silent one, placed a hand on his shoulder. Her touch was gentle, but it carried a weight of understanding. She knew what Jackson was feeling. She could sense it too. There was a danger here, something that had been hidden for millennia. As the ship descended toward the surface, a low rumble shook the ground below. The clouds above parted, revealing a massive structure that seemed to rise out of the earth itself. It was ancient, built into the mountainside, with symbols etched into its surface. The same symbols that had been on the door beneath Velmara, the same ones they had seen in the crystal pillar. This was it, the final destination. They landed the ship near the structure, and Jackson, Luma, and Saya stepped out into the eerie silence. The air was thick with tension, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. They approached the entrance of the structure, a massive archway that was half covered in vines and moss. The symbols on the door pulsed softly as Jackson placed his hand against them. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a groan, the door slowly began to open, revealing the dark interior beyond. Inside, the walls were lined with ancient technology, machines, consoles, and devices that hummed with an energy that was both foreign and familiar. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on it rested a crystal. It was not like any crystal Jackson had ever seen. It was large, pulsating with an inner light, and as he approached it, he felt the same sensation that had guided him through this journey. This was the final gift of the ancients, the key to unlocking the galaxy's future. But as he reached out to touch the crystal, the ground beneath them trembled violently. The entire structure shook, and a voice, deep, ancient, and full of authority, echoed through the chamber. "You have come for the gift, but are you ready to receive it?" The air grew colder, and the walls seemed to close in around them. The voice was not just in the room, it was in their minds. Jackson's heart raced as he looked at Luma and Saya, knowing that this was the moment. The gift was not just for them, it was for the galaxy. But the question remained, would the galaxy accept it, or would it fall to greed and destruction? With a steady hand, Jackson reached for the crystal, and as his fingers brushed its surface, the light around them flared brightly. The voice spoke again, this time with a hint of approval. "The gift is yours. But remember, its power comes with responsibility." As the light enveloped them, Jackson knew that this was only the beginning. The galaxy was waiting, and now they had the key to its future. But the journey ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, enemies, and obstacles. But they had the gift, and that would be enough.